Special Agent Marcus Chen drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, jazz music playing softly as he drove through the quiet streets of suburban Atlanta. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across his silver sedan. After 18 hours of undercover work investigating a series of civil rights violations, all he could think about was getting home to his wife, Sarah, and their golden retriever, Max. The day had been particularly draining. As part of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, he'd spent months building trust within the community, documenting cases of systematic discrimination that seemed to be increasing in this otherwise peaceful suburb. His car's clock showed 7:43 p.m., just enough time to pick up some takeout from Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant. The familiar streets of Maple Grove subdivision were nearly empty, with only a few dog walkers and joggers taking advantage of the cool evening air. Chen stopped completely at the intersection of Oak and Pine, just as he had thousands of times before. In his rearview mirror, he noticed a police cruiser that had been following him for the past few blocks. The blue and red lights suddenly flashed to life behind him. Chen sighed, already knowing what this might be about. He'd been through similar situations before, both as an FBI agent investigating complaints and, unfortunately, as a civilian. He pulled over carefully, positioning his car well off the road near a well-lit grocery store parking lot. Following standard procedure, Chen placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. He watched in his side mirror as Officer Derek Miller approached, noting how the officer's hand rested on his holster, an unnecessary gesture that spoke volumes about preconceptions. "License and registration," Miller barked, his flashlight beam deliberately aimed to blind Chen's side mirror. Chen noticed the officer's body camera light wasn't on, a detail his FBI training wouldn't let him miss. "Good evening, officer," Chen replied calmly, his voice steady and professional. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "You ran that stop sign back there," Miller said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Chen knew with absolute certainty he hadn't, but 15 years of law enforcement experience had taught him to choose his battles wisely. "Sir, I can assure you I made a complete stop," Chen said, slowly reaching for his credentials. "I'm actually a federal agent with the FBI." "And I?" "Sure you are." Miller cut him off with a dismissive laugh. "Let me see your license and registration first, and keep your hands where I can see them." As Chen carefully reached for his documents, he noticed a second patrol car pulling up behind them. The situation was escalating, but he remained composed, mentally recording every detail. The time, the location, Officer Miller's badge number, and most importantly, the fact that what should have been a routine traffic stop was about to become something much more serious. The tension in the air grew thicker as Chen carefully handed over his driver's license, FBI credentials, and vehicle registration through the car window. Officer Miller barely glanced at the FBI badge, his flashlight beam still aimed directly at Chen's face. Behind them, 2 more officers from the second patrol car stood watching, their hands resting casually on their belts. "Step out of the vehicle," Miller ordered, his voice carrying an edge that made Chen's FBI training kick into high gear. Chen knew this wasn't about a stop sign anymore, if it ever had been. "Officer Miller," Chen spoke clearly, making sure the dashcam in his own car could pick up his voice. "I want to cooperate fully, but I need you to acknowledge that you've seen my FBI credentials. I'm on active duty, and—" "I said, step out of the vehicle." Miller's voice rose sharply, his hand now gripping his holster. Chen noticed the other officers shifting their positions, spreading out in standard containment formation. With deliberate slowness, Chen opened his car door. The cool evening air hit his face as he emerged, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, clearly showing he was unarmed. The grocery store's parking lot lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, while a small group of onlookers had begun to gather at a safe distance. Phones race. "Place your hands on the hood," Miller commanded, though Chen had already assumed the position. He could feel the heat from his car's engine through his palms as Miller roughly patted him down. "Officer," Chen tried once more, his tone professional but firm. "I'm conducting an ongoing federal investigation in this area. You're currently interfering with a federal investigation." Miller's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "In this neighborhood?" "Right. And I'm the Tooth Fairy." The other officers chuckled, but Chen noticed one of them shifting uncomfortably, perhaps realizing the situation was veering into dangerous territory. Chen caught his reflection in his car's window, his tailored suit now wrinkled, his normally composed face showing signs of strain. He thought about his wife Sarah, probably already wondering why he was late. He thought about his years of training others to handle situations exactly like this, teaching them to remain calm, to document everything, to work within the system. A small crowd had gathered near the grocery store entrance now, their phones recording everything. Chen could hear murmurs of concern, saw a few people making calls. He knew this situation was seconds away from either de-escalating or exploding into something much worse. Just then, Miller grabbed Chen's FBI credentials from the car hood, finally examining them under his flashlight. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of realization, quickly replaced by something harder. Instead of backing down, Miller's grip on the credentials tightened until his knuckles whitened. "Well," Miller said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "seems like we might have ourselves a situation here." He turned to his fellow officers, and Chen could see the moment when pride and prejudice overtook professional judgment. "Let's see how real these credentials are back at the station." Chen's heart rate remained steady as Officer Miller roughly grabbed his wrist, pulling it behind his back with unnecessary force. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his skin, tighter than any professional law enforcement officer would normally apply them. Chen didn't resist. Years of FBI training had prepared him for moments exactly like this. "Officer Miller, badge number 4479. Chen spoke clearly and calmly, knowing his car's dashcam was still recording. "I want to state for the record that you're arresting a federal agent without cause. I respectfully request you contact the FBI field office immediately." The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones raised, capturing every moment. The grocery store's bright fluorescent lights illuminated the scene like a stage, while the evening traffic slowed to a crawl as passing cars tried to glimpse what was happening. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller began reciting, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction that made Chen's trained ear recognize deeper issues at play. The other two officers stood back, their body language showing increasing discomfort with the situation. One of them, a younger officer whose nameplate read Rodriguez, kept glancing between Chen's FBI credentials, still sitting on the car hood, and his superior officer. As Miller led him toward the patrol car, Chen caught sight of Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor, standing among the onlookers. Her hand was pressed to her mouth in shock as she recognized him. Chen gave her a small, reassuring nod. He knew she would call Sarah, and more importantly, she would be another witness to what was unfolding. "Watch your head," Miller said with mock courtesy, pushing Chen's head down harder than necessary as he guided him into the back of the patrol car. Chen maintained his composure, mentally recording every detail. The time, 8:17 p.m. The gathering crowd, approximately 23 people. The surveillance cameras visible from the grocery store. And most importantly, Officer Rodriguez's growing uncertainty. Through the patrol car's window, Chen could see Officer Rodriguez picking up his FBI credentials from the hood of his car, studying them carefully. The young officer's face showed a mix of concern and realization. He turned to say something to Miller, but Miller had already slammed the driver's door shut. As they pulled away from the scene, Chen caught a glimpse of Officer Rodriguez pulling out his phone, his worried expression illuminated by the screen's glow. Despite the uncomfortable situation, Chen felt a glimmer of hope. He recognized the signs of a fellow officer choosing conscience over misplaced loyalty. Inside the patrol car, Chen sat straight-backed and dignified, despite the too tight handcuffs. His mind was already several steps ahead, mapping out the sequence of events that would unfold once word reached the FBI field office. He knew his team would be assembling within minutes, and this incident would become much more than just a wrongful arrest. It would become a testament to why his work in the Civil Rights Division was still so desperately needed. The patrol car turned onto the main road, its lights still flashing, carrying them toward a confrontation that would soon make headlines across the nation. Inside the bustling police station, the atmosphere crackled with tension as Officer Miller led Chen through the booking area. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of desk sergeants and officers who looked up from their work, sensing something unusual about this particular arrest. Chen maintained his professional demeanor as his fingerprints were taken, noting how the booking officer's hands trembled slightly when she saw his FBI credentials laid on her desk. Her eyes darted between the credentials and Miller, who stood watching with arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Sir," the booking officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, spoke hesitantly, "these credentials appear completely authentic. We should probably contact. Just process him." Miller cut her off sharply. "Let the feds come down here themselves if they want to sort this out." Unknown to Miller, that process had already begun. Through the station's windows, Chen could see several black SUVs pulling into the parking lot, their government plates catching the street lights. He allowed himself a small smile. His team was nothing if not efficient. The station's front doors swung open, and Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, Diana Warren strode in, her badge already out. Behind her, 6 more agents entered, spreading out strategically around the room. The local officers present instantly recognized the shift in power dynamics. "Officer Miller," Warren's voice cut through the station's noise like a knife, "I'm Special Agent Warren from the FBI. You're currently holding one of my agents without cause. I suggest you remove those cuffs immediately." Miller's face flushed red, but he stood his ground. This man was resisting arrest and... "Your dash cam was off." "Officer Miller," Warren interrupted smoothly, "but Agent Chen's vehicle cameras were running. We've already reviewed the footage." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Now, would you like to remove those cuffs, or shall we add federal obstruction charges to the civil rights violations we're already documenting?" The booking area had gone completely silent. Officer Rodriguez, who had arrived moments after the FBI team, stood near the door, looking both relieved and vindicated. He had been the one to make the call to the field office, choosing to do the right thing despite potential backlash. As another officer quickly removed Chen's handcuffs, Warren turned to address the room at large. "This incident will be thoroughly investigated. I expect full cooperation from everyone present." Her eyes lingered on the station's security cameras. "All footage from the last 2 hours is now considered evidence in a federal investigation." Chen rubbed his wrists, maintaining his professional composure even as he saw Miller being led to an interview room by 2 FBI agents. The tables had turned, but Chen took no pleasure in it. This was exactly the kind of systemic issue he'd been investigating. Now he'd experienced it firsthand. As he gathered his belongings, Chen's phone buzzed with messages from Sarah. Among them was a video link. The incident had already gone viral, with footage from bystanders' phones spreading across social media. What had started as a biased traffic stop was about to become a catalyst for change in the department, and Chen knew his real work was just beginning. The next morning, Chen sat in ASAC Warren's office, reviewing the incident reports while news channels played silently on the wall-mounted TV. The footage of his arrest had spread like wildfire across social media, sparking intense discussions about law enforcement accountability. Outside the federal building, reporters had gathered, hoping to catch a statement. "The department's internal affairs is conducting their own investigation," Warren said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Officer Rodriguez has provided a detailed statement about similar incidents he's witnessed. Turns out, your arrest might have been the tipping point we needed." Chen nodded, thinking about the young officer who'd chosen to make that crucial phone call. On his phone, another message popped up, this time from Mrs. Patterson. his neighbor, who had helped organize a community meeting to discuss police-community relations. The incident was becoming a catalyst for exactly the kind of change he'd been working toward. "The police chief wants to meet with you," Warren continued, her expression thoughtful. "Not for damage control. He seems genuinely concerned about reforming department policies. Your dashcam footage, combined with the bystander videos, makes this case impossible to ignore." Through the office window, Chen could see his team hard at work, coordinating with civil rights organizations and community leaders. What had happened to him was now part of a larger conversation, one that could lead to meaningful changes in training and accountability. Sarah appeared in the doorway, bringing coffee and a supportive smile. She'd taken the day off from her teaching job to be with him, understanding the weight of what was unfolding. "The local news wants to interview both of us," she said, setting the coffee down. "They're interested in hearing about our experiences in the community." Chen considered this carefully. As an FBI agent, he usually avoided the spotlight, but this situation was different. His position and experience could help bridge gaps between law enforcement and the community they served. The interview could be an opportunity to discuss solutions rather than just highlight problems. "There's more," Warren added, pulling up an email on her screen. "Officer Rodriguez has formally requested to join the FBI's training program. He says yesterday's incident showed him where he could make the most difference." Chen smiled at this unexpected development. Sometimes positive change came from the most challenging situations. His phone buzzed again. The police chief had moved up their meeting, eager to discuss comprehensive reforms for his department. Looking at the stack of reports and messages on the desk, Chen realized his wrongful arrest had become a turning point. It wasn't just about one officer's actions anymore. It was about creating lasting change in how law enforcement operated in their community. "We'll need to prepare a presentation for the police academy too," Warren said, reading another message. "They want to use this case as a training example." She looked up at Chen, ready to turn this incident into something positive. Chen nodded, reaching for his coffee. The media circus outside might be focused on the dramatic arrest footage, but the real story was just beginning. A story about transformation, accountability, and the power of doing what's right, even when it's difficult. In the brightly lit conference room of the police headquarters, Chen sat across from Police Chief Thompson, watching as the older man reviewed the comprehensive reform proposal they'd spent weeks developing. The room's wall-mounted screens displayed statistics, training protocols, and community feedback gathered since the incident. "This goes beyond just body cameras and bias training," Chief Thompson said, flipping through the document. His reading glasses reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "What you're proposing here could revolutionize how we connect with our community." Chen nodded, thinking about the series of town hall meetings they'd held over the past month. Officer Rodriguez, now in his second week of FBI training, had helped organize them, bringing in officers who wanted to be part of the solution. The meetings had started tense but gradually evolved into productive discussions about mutual respect and understanding. "The local police union has concerns," Thompson continued, "but after seeing the community's response to our initial changes, they're more open to discussion." He paused, looking at a photo on his desk of his own grandchildren. Nobody wants their kids to grow up afraid of the people meant to protect them. Through the conference room's glass walls, Chen could see officers going about their daily duties. The department felt different now, more officers wearing active body cameras, engaging more respectfully with civilians, and most importantly, speaking up when they witnessed concerning behavior from colleagues. Sarah had become an unexpected part of the change too. As a high school teacher, she'd started a program bringing students and police officers together for open dialogues. The initial awkwardness had given way to genuine connections, with several officers now volunteering as mentors. "Officer Miller's disciplinary hearing is next week," Thompson said, his tone serious. "His actions that night were unacceptable, but they've led to something important." He gestured to the proposal. "Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to realize how much needs to change." Chen's phone buzzed. A message from Morin about the latest community feedback surveys. The numbers were encouraging. Trust in local law enforcement had begun to climb. Complaints were being addressed more thoroughly, and more officers were voluntarily attending additional training sessions. The FBI training program has received a record number of applications from your officers, Chen noted, pulling up the statistics. And Officer Rodriguez's weekly reports show he's excelling in civil rights law and community engagement modules. Chief Thompson smiled, standing to look out the window at the city below. You know, when I first heard about your arrest, I thought it would tear this department apart. He turned back to Chen. Instead, it's helping us rebuild it into something better. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Patterson, arriving for her appointment as the newly appointed Civilian Oversight Committee chair. Her presence in the building, once unthinkable, was now a regular occurrence, bringing community perspectives directly into police operations. As Chen gathered his materials to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the window. The incident that could have left him bitter had instead become a bridge, connecting different parts of the community in ways he'd always hoped possible, but never quite believed he'd see. 6 months after the incident, Chen stood at the podium in the police academy's main auditorium, looking out at a sea of faces, new recruits mixed with veteran officers, all there for the department's first mandatory community relations certification program. The morning light streamed through tall windows, highlighting the eager expressions of those ready to learn. Change doesn't happen overnight. Chen began, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. Behind him, the screen showed a photo from that fateful evening, captured by one of the bystanders. But it happens because of choices we make every day. In the front row, Officer Rodriguez, now Special Agent Rodriguez, sat taking notes. His FBI training was nearly complete, and he'd already been approved to help lead future sessions of this very program. Next to him sat Mrs. Patterson and several other community leaders who had become regular contributors to police training. Sarah, watching from the side of the stage, gave Chen an encouraging smile. Her student police dialogue program had been so successful that 3 neighboring districts had adopted it. Just last week, one of her former students had applied to the police academy, saying those dialogues had shown her how she could make a difference. Officer Miller made choices that night, Chen continued, his voice carrying through the silent auditorium. But so did Officer Rodriguez. So did the bystanders who recorded the incident. So did every person who decided this would be a moment for change rather than division. The screen changed to show current statistics. Complaints down by 40%, community trust ratings up by 35%, and a significant increase in successful crime prevention through community cooperation. These weren't just numbers. They represented real changes in people's lives. Chief Thompson, sitting in the back of the auditorium, nodded approvingly. The department's new policies, shaped by both law enforcement and community input, had become a model for other cities. Just yesterday, representatives from 3 major police departments had visited to learn about their reforms. Today, we're not just talking about what went wrong, Chen said, moving through his presentation. We're talking about how to do things right, how to serve and protect while building trust, how to be the kind of officers our communities need. The audience remained engaged, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. These weren't just mandatory training hours to them anymore. This was about creating real change. Even some of the initially skeptical veteran officers had become advocates for the new approach after seeing its positive effects. During the break, Chen checked his phone to find a message from ASAC Warren. The Civil Rights Division's caseload had shifted notably. Fewer complaints about officer misconduct, more requests for assistance in implementing similar programs in other districts. As the participants filed back in for the afternoon session, Chen noticed a familiar face. Officer Miller's former partner, now one of the most active supporters of the reform program. He told Chen once that watching the video from that night had been a wake-up call, making him realize how easily unaddressed biases could destroy careers and communities. The incident that could have deepened divisions had instead become a foundation for understanding and progress. As Chen prepared to continue his presentation, he knew that every person in that auditorium represented a chance for positive change in someone's life. 1 year to the day after Chen's arrest, he stood in the same grocery store parking lot, but the scene couldn't have been more different. Instead of flashing police lights and angry voices, the space was filled with community members gathering for the first annual Unity and Law Enforcement Festival. Food trucks lined the perimeter, children played with police dogs, and officers chatted casually with residents. Sarah squeezed his hand as they watched Special Agent Rodriguez demonstrate FBI investigation techniques to a group of fascinated teenagers. Among them was Mrs. Patterson's grandson, who had recently announced his plan to apply for the Police Academy's new community-focused training program. "Remember when you got arrested right here?" a small voice piped up. Chen looked down to see one of Sarah's students, a bright-eyed girl named Maya. "My mom recorded it on her phone. But now, she and Officer Thompson are friends. They're on the same community council." Chen smiled, watching Officer Thompson, Miller's former partner, helping kids try on a police vest at a nearby booth. The changes weren't just on paper anymore. They were visible in these everyday interactions, in the easy smiles and relaxed conversations between officers and civilians. Chief Thompson approached them, holding a framed document. "Just got this from the governor's office," he said proudly. "Our department's new training program is being adopted statewide. They're calling it the Chen Rodriguez model. Hope you don't mind us using your names." The festival around them buzzed with activity. At one booth, officers and community members worked together to plan upcoming neighborhood watch programs. At another, local teenagers showed elderly residents how to use the department's new community safety app, developed with input from residents of all ages. ASAC Warren arrived with more good news. The FBI had officially recognized their district's transformation as a case study in successful police reform. Departments from across the country were sending representatives to learn from their experience. Near the grocery store entrance, a wall displayed photos showing the year's progress. Town hall meetings, training sessions, community events, and ceremonies. In the center was a photo of Chen and Rodriguez speaking to the Police Academy's graduating class, their story now an integral part of every new officer's training. "Dad," called the voice, and Chen turned to see Maya's father, a local pastor, waving him over. "We're about to start the Unity Prayer. Would you and Sarah join us?" The gathering included people of all backgrounds, officers, teachers, business owners, and residents, coming together in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago. As the sun began to set, casting the same orange glow as that fateful evening, Chen looked around at what they'd built from that difficult moment. Officer Miller's actions had sparked a change, but it was the collective choice to transform anger into action that had created lasting impact. Sarah nudged him, pointing to a young officer helping an elderly woman with her groceries. "That's what real protection and service looks like," she whispered. Chen nodded, knowing that while their work wasn't finished, they had created something remarkable. A template for change that proved when communities and law enforcement chose to work together, extraordinary transformations were possible. The evening ended with a community dinner, served at tables where officers and residents sat together, sharing stories and plans for the future, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes start with the most challenging moments.